The mess hall at Fort Redwood sat in near silence. 300 soldiers eating under fluorescent lights, boots dragging softly against polished tile. Private Avery Maddox sat alone at the far end, hands folded, eyes lowered, just trying to get through the meal unnoticed. She adjusted her tray, and her paper cup tipped juice spilling across the table, dripping to the floor. She grabbed napkins quickly, hoping no one saw. But someone did. General Marcus Halverson, moving down the aisle on inspection, stopped abruptly. The room froze. Trays paused mid-air, conversations died, even the air seemed to hold its breath. He stared at her like she had committed something unforgivable. You cannot control a simple drink. How will you control anything worth protecting? Avery stood automatically, posture straight. Halverson's open palm struck her across the face. The sound echoed off the steel-framed tables. Her head turned from the force, but when she faced forward again, her expression was unchanged. No tears, no pushback. 300 pairs of eyes watched, wide, silent, stunned. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss stories like this. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Private Avery Maddox was 27 years old, though in this place she looked younger, maybe because she rarely spoke, rarely argued, rarely took up space. Her personnel file painted a plain, unimpressive picture, bottom 5 percentile in timed runs, inconsistent in tactical movement drills, and scoring barely above minimum on weapons qualification. Instructors marked her as polite, teachable, and works hard, which was their gentle way of saying she could never keep up. Her rifle time always came last, her movement was late by seconds, and she seemed to live in the shadow of stronger performers. People believed her silence was evidence of doubt. They mistook a calm presence for insecurity. When formation stood tall, Avery stood slightly behind the line, not enough to draw reprimand, just enough to be overlooked. She kept her sleeves perfectly rolled, her boots polished with a care that bordered on ritual, but her uniform always seemed half a size too big. Nothing was sloppy, nothing was wrong, but nothing stood out either. She never volunteered, never stepped forward when instructors asked for demonstration, never raised her hand when teams needed someone extra. Someone once joked that she could stand between two flags and disappear into the stitching. Another corporal whispered to a friend, "She's paperwork waiting to happen," not as cruelty, just as prediction. Her platoon treated her like someone they needed to protect, not depend on. Someone you tell to hang back, someone who gets assigned perimeter duty because that's where she can't ruin anything important. But subtle things didn't match that perception. During an evening chow rotation, a recruit dropped a stack of stainless plates. The crash echoed across the hallway. Avery didn't flinch, but she did shift. Her feet adjusted, weight settling to the ball of her right foot, shoulders lowered as if preparing for impact, eyes scanning directionally instead of reacting emotionally. It lasted maybe half a second, but anyone trained could have recognized it as instinct, not accident. On weapons cleaning days, she worked alone. Other soldiers chatted, wasted time, swapped parts, and teased about malfunctions. Avery sat at her station with exact timing, locking bolt groups, wiping carbon in perfect sequences, rotating the cloth edge each time so no part contaminated another. It was unnecessary precision, almost obsessive, but she performed it with quiet repetition and no explanation. Her breathing slowed during that task. Her posture straightened. Her mind clearly remembered this process from somewhere more serious. And she always returned to a stance of perfect center alignment, feet at measured spacing, shoulders squared, spine vertical, not conscious but conditioned. Late one night, the gym lights were off except for the emergency strip near the floor. The sound of faint movement could be heard between the stacked mats and heavy bag racks. Avery was there alone, she thought, unseen. She practiced transitions slowly, inside wrist break, subtle hip rotation, redirected pressure, takedown sequence, recovery stance. No sound, no bag impact, no dramatic exertion. Just quiet, controlled repetition, like someone who used these maneuvers before, not someone learning them. She paused occasionally, palms resting on her thighs, as though remembering something real and heavy. What she didn't know was that someone saw her only briefly passing through the glass door window. But that moment was already gone when she stood upright again, breathing steady, body at rest. Had you seen her alone in that dim light measuring space, striking precision into air, practicing things normal recruits never think about? What would you have assumed that night? The first crack in patience came out in the field, where the wind never seemed to stop and the scrub hills around Fort Redwood made every step feel heavier than it should. The platoon moved along a ridgeline during the land navigation assessment, rucks packed, compasses out, eyes on grid squares and contour lines. It was supposed to be straightforward: find the points, stay together, make the time. Avery walked near the back as usual, ruck strap digging into her shoulder. Her group partner, Specialist Tyler Griggs, kept glancing over, watching the way she shifted the weight. He was taller, broader, one of those naturally strong soldiers who had never struggled to pass anything. To him, Avery looked like a problem waiting to happen. "You want me to grab some of that?" he asked quietly, reaching toward the side of her ruck. She gave a small, polite shake of her head. "I am good, thanks," she said, voice calm, not defensive. Griggs frowned. It did not add up. She did not move like someone about to drop. She moved like someone measuring every step, every inch of ground. Up on a small rise, General Marcus Halverson stood with binoculars pressed to his eyes. Next to him, a major and a captain held clipboards and tablets. Halverson tracked the formation as it snaked along the ridge, letting his gaze settle exactly on Avery. "There," he said, handing the binoculars to the major. "Back row." "That one." They watched as Avery lagged a few precious yards behind the rest. She did not panic, did not sprint to catch up, just kept the same measured pace. Enough to finish, never enough to impress. Halverson scribbled notes into his leather portfolio, the pen strokes visibly hard. The major beside him cleared his throat, uncertain whether to speak. He decided not to. Far below, Sergeant Diaz checked his watch, saw the time margin shrinking, and his temper flared. "Maddox, move it," he shouted. "This is a test, not a nature walk." The words carried across the hillside. Some heads turned back toward Avery. Griggs half-stepped as if to put himself between her and the anger, then stopped when he remembered that protecting her only made things worse in the eyes of people like Diaz. Avery simply nodded once. "Roger, Sergeant." Her breath was steady. She closed the distance just enough to satisfy the standard, nothing more. When they reached the rally point, Diaz singled her out in front of the group. "Every second we lose is on you," he snapped. "You know that, right?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, expression unreadable. She rejoined formation. No excuses. No frustration. Just that same quiet acceptance that made people around her feel guilty without knowing why. The second crack came in the live stress simulation hall, where the lights were harsh and the noise was worse. The room was built to mimic chaos alarms, simulated gunfire, shouted commands, smoke machines puffing artificial haze into corners. Multiple squads moved through shifting scenarios, reacting to projected threats and role players with blank-firing rifles. Avery's squad moved along a narrow corridor when the scenario shifted. Sounds of incoming fire roared from speakers overhead. Red lights strobed. Smoke rolled out from a side door. A casualty mannequin lay in the open, sensors ticking down time. The plan called for rapid movement, cover placement, and coordinated drag to safety. Avery knew the drill forwards and backwards. She had run versions of this in places where the smoke was not fake and the blood was not rubber dye. But here, in this room, she hesitated deliberately. She froze in the doorway, eyes scanning as if she could not decide where to move. Her hands were not shaking, but she let them look uncertain. One of her teammates shouted at her to grab the casualty's feet. She took a beat too long to respond. That beat was enough for the simulator to register additional casualty hits. Indicators flashed. The after-action screen began ticking off lost lives. "God, Maddox," someone yelled. "We lost 3 because you locked up." The scenario reset with a dull buzzing sound. The overhead light shifted from red to white, and the smell of burnt powder from the blanks hung in the air. Helmets came off. People wiped sweat and frustration from their faces. In the observation booth above, Halverson stood with arms folded, looking down through the glass. His jaw was tight. On the playback monitor to his right, the freeze frame showed Avery standing in the doorway, body language hesitant, while the clock drained seconds away. "There," he said again, pointing. "That hesitation. That is what kills you in the real world." The captain beside him tried to offer context. "Sir, these are training reps. She might improve with..." "With what?" Halverson cut him off. "More time being shielded by her squad? More leaders pretending effort is enough?" He tapped the glass with 2 fingers, gaze hard. "She is what is wrong with this entire approach. You build your training around your weakest link. You pay for it later." Down on the floor, Avery stood apart from her squad while the instructors delivered the critique. They did not raise their voices. They did not have to. Her squad leader, Sergeant Carter, emphasized communication, decision-making, confidence. Others nodded, glancing at Avery from the corner of their eyes. She accepted every word without protest. "Understood, Sergeant," she said quietly. Internally, she replayed every motion, every angle, every sound from the last scenario. Her mind did not blame herself for losing 3 simulated lives. Her mind remembered nights when the lives at stake were not simulated at all, nights when she moved too fast instead of too slow, and the consequences echoed for years. The third crack came during the final round of the company physical training test. The sunrise over Fort Redwood turned the sky pale orange, the kind of morning that should have felt fresh. Instead, the air was thick with pressure. It was the last evaluation run before results locked in. They lined up on the track in platoon blocks. Commanders watched, clipboards ready, stopwatch lanyards looped around their wrists. General Halverson stood at the far end near the finish line, arms behind his back, expression carved from granite. When the whistle blew, the company surged forward in waves. Boots hit the track in rhythm. Breathing began as controlled exhale and inhale, already drifting toward future fatigue. Avery started at the back, just like always. Her stride was smooth but intentionally short, conserving energy she did not need to conserve. The pace settled, and little by little, the crowd thinned into clusters. She could have moved up. She felt it in her legs, the easy, familiar burn that used to belong to missions and timed infiltrations. But she dropped her focus slightly, allowed her breathing to sound heavier than it really was, and let the distance between her and the front widen instead of shrink. A few soldiers noticed. Specialist Griggs glanced over his shoulder, saw her falling behind, and instinctively adjusted his own speed. Others near him did the same, their pace softening by tiny fractions. They did not call out to her, did not make a show of it. They simply refused to leave her alone at the rear. In Halverson's eyes, that small, quiet loyalty was an insult. He watched as a half-dozen otherwise fit soldiers sacrificed their lap times to keep Avery from looking like the only one struggling. To him, it was a visible disease spreading down the ranks, compassion where he believed there should be ruthless standards. By the final lap, sweat streaked every face, and breathing turned ragged. Avery maintained her controlled struggle, landing just barely above the failing mark as she crossed the line. The soldiers who had slowed for her finished within seconds. Some clapped her on the shoulder, breathless but sincere. "Nice work, Maddox," one said. "You finished strong," she answered with a small nod, words simple. "Thanks." From a few yards away, Halverson watched the little scene with a deepening scowl. To him, this was not camaraderie. It was infection. They were adapting their standards to protect the slowest, the weakest, the one who held the formation back. He turned away, anger simmering, and signaled for the company to assemble in the main hallway outside the gym. The walls there were lined with old unit photos, framed commendations, and flags that had flown in combat zones. It was supposed to be a place of pride. As the formation lined up, Avery took her usual spot near the back, still catching her breath in controlled intervals. Her cheeks were flushed, hairline damp, uniform clinging slightly at the neck. She blended into the line like she always did, present but unimportant. Halverson stepped into the hallway, boots striking the floor with deliberate force that made heads turn. Conversations died mid-sentence. Helmets were tucked under arms, every spine straightened. His eyes scanned along the rows until they landed on Avery. He pointed directly at her. "Maddox," he barked, "front and center." She stepped out, boots clicking, moving to the center of the hallway. The formation parted just enough to create a small open space with her standing alone in the middle. The overhead fluorescent lights made the moment feel even harsher. Halverson closed the distance with measured steps. When he stopped in front of her, the difference in height and rank made the space feel like a courtroom. "Do you think this army owes you protection?" he asked, voice loud enough to bounce off the walls. Avery held her gaze just below his chin, exactly where regulation said it should be. Her breathing had slowed, no longer betraying the exertion of the run. There was no tremor in her hands, no visible fear. "No, sir," she said softly. The answer, quiet and clean, did something strange to the hallway. A few soldiers in the back let out short, nervous snickers, unsure if she was being naive or brave. Someone whispered, "She has no idea." Halverson heard the small ripple of laughter and hated it. He did not want humor here. He wanted discomfort, apology, visible shame. Instead, he got a calm admission that took responsibility and refused victimhood. Her lack of emotional reaction irritated him more than tears ever could have. He stared at her a moment longer, jaw clenched, then stepped back and addressed the entire formation. "This is not a charity," he said, voice booming. "You are not here to bend the standards around whoever is struggling the most. Those days are over." No one answered. No one moved. Avery quietly stepped back into formation when dismissed, returning to her place at the rear as if nothing had changed at all. But something had. The distance between what Halverson believed a soldier should be and what Avery actually was had just widened into something neither of them fully understood. If you had been standing in that hallway, watching a general confront the quietest soldier in the building, what would you have done in that moment? Argue for her, or absorb it in silence? There was a late afternoon quiet over the training yard, the kind that settled after drills ended but before evening formations began. Soldiers sat along the bleachers hydrating, loosening bootlaces, wiping dust from their faces. Staff Sergeant Elena March stood near the equipment cage, organizing gear returns, clipboard under her arm. Her eyes drifted toward the far bench where Avery Maddox sat alone again. Avery wasn't resting. She was wrapping her wrists, slowly, methodically. But the way she wrapped them was wrong. Not wrong in form, wrong for someone who supposedly barely passed combatives qualification. The tape wasn't standard white athletic strip. It was braided cloth, interwoven in a pattern linked only to a handful of specialized grappling courses. March had seen that pattern once before, years back during an instructor assignment. Only high-level close-quarters operators used it because it didn't tear under torque. Avery pulled the tape tight, anchored, then folded it inward across the joint. March watched longer than she meant to. Avery wasn't rehearsing, she was remembering. That kind of wrap wasn't taught at Fort Redwood. It was taught in places where losing control meant dying faster. Later that week, range day came with a stiff crosswind that pushed against everyone's firing tables. Targets fluttered in the gusts like loose canvas in a storm. The line instructor, Sergeant Finch, lectured about maintaining hold and resisting over-adjustment. Soldiers lined up, rifles at low ready. Avery stepped into position. She paused, not to aim, but to watch the wind flag near lane 9. Finch walked past her, correcting posture for another shooter, when Avery spoke quietly without looking up. "Sir, angle your shoulder." "The wind isn't pushing left, it's folding onto itself." Finch stopped. "Folding wind?" He frowned, assuming she was mixing terms she didn't understand. "Just focus on your fundamentals, Maddox," he muttered. She nodded. "Yes, sir." Later, when the group reviewed target patterns, Finch saw the strange drift left, then sharp initial correction right. Avery's observation had been spot on. But she hadn't corrected her own shots, hadn't proven anything. She let her grouping remain just passable. Finch stared at the paper target and whispered, almost to himself, "How did she see that?" Nobody answered. In the medical wing, a routine vitals check revealed something else. The nurse lifted Avery's collar slightly to attach the stethoscope and paused. Just above the clavicle rested a thin scar, perfectly symmetrical, healed in a surgical line, not jagged, not from accident. It was the kind of incision found only in trauma stabilization or high-risk field extractions. "Burn?" the nurse asked lightly, though she already knew it wasn't. "No, ma'am," Avery replied. The nurse studied her eyes, waiting for context. None came. Avery just lifted her collar back into position as if it belonged there. You don't earn a scar like that from tripping over training equipment. And you don't carry it at 27 without a story. Rumors began forming, not loudly, not directly. But soldiers had a way of identifying what didn't fit. During uniform inspection outside headquarters, a senior enlisted with 30 years behind him noticed something faint near Avery's wrist, a faded training serial, printed once on fabric tape, worn to almost nothing. He knew the sequence immediately, not regular platoon numbering, not exercise labeling. He had seen it only once, during a cross-branch exchange with a classified combatives detachment. He didn't confront her, didn't ask questions. He just stood, staring at her wrist a little longer than normal. By evening chow, whispers had already found their way into corners. "She raps like she's protecting joints." "Did you hear about the scar?" she warned an instructor about wind drift. "You don't learn that unless you were trained somewhere else." And finally somebody said the thing everyone was thinking: she wasn't always a private. No one said it with confidence, no one said it out loud to leadership. But the idea floated just above the silence, waiting. If someone was hiding their past, Fort Redwood was exactly the kind of place they would hide it. Some soldiers were sent here to sharpen potential. Others were sent here to disappear. Nobody knew which one Avery was. Yet. It was close to 2300 hours when the incident happened, late enough that lights across the yard were dimmed, early enough that stragglers were still moving equipment back into storage. The wind cut through the gaps of the training facility walls, shaking loose cables and rattling scaffolding bars still set from the afternoon exercise. A few trainees lingered on the west side loading dock, stacking practice barricades and rolled tarps. Private Mark Ellison stepped up onto the second platform of the scaffold to unclip the training cam netting. No one thought much of it. He was light, quick, and careless in a way that came with youth. He tugged once, twice, then leaned harder on the strap buckle. The metal brace beneath his left boot shifted. A moment later, the entire side rail jerked down. It wasn't life or death height, but it was enough to break an ankle, enough to hit the wrong edge at the wrong angle. He pitched sideways, arms flailing, weight dropping backward. Avery moved before Ellison even made a sound. Not fast in a panicked way, fast in a trained way. She slipped forward, one knee lowering instinctively, spine aligned, hips squared. Her hand caught Ellison's wrist, not squeezing, not yanking, redirecting downward pressure so that his momentum transferred into her center line. She rotated his weight exactly 60 degrees inward, lowering him into her kneeling posture. The angle protected his shoulder. Her foot slid back, stabilizing his fall with minimal impact. He landed upright against her forearm, not flat, not twisted. No cracking sound, no bruising impact. Ellison blinked, stunned. I didn't even... What just happened?" "You're fine," Avery said calmly. "Check your footing next time." She stepped back, releasing him as if nothing unusual had occurred. She didn't look around. She didn't wait for thanks. She simply walked toward the equipment bins, picking up a tarp roll like nothing happened. Someone had seen it. Captain Joel McKinley had been standing near the corner of the loading dock, clipboard under his forearm, reading task completion logs. He was a man who rarely reacted visibly to anything, not because he lacked emotion, but because he had spent enough time shaping recruits to recognize when a moment mattered. His eyes tracked Avery's movement long after she turned away. He knew exactly what she did. That maneuver wasn't just a reflex. It wasn't something you learn after one cycle of Army combatives. It was a black-level transition, taught only to combat instructors who served in real kinetic theaters. The motion was textbook. down to the stabilization angle of her knee and rotational torque applied on release. A maneuver like that is only used when someone has broken falls under unpredictable terrain, wet rooftops, unstable metal, zero visibility alleyways, or open-air platforms in contested zones. And Avery executed it unconsciously. McKinley's heart dropped into his stomach, not in fear, but in recognition. He stood there longer than he meant to, gaze fixed toward her silhouette in the dim training lights, body still. He didn't call after her. He didn't ask for an explanation. He only felt one unmistakable truth settle into place. That woman was not learning to survive. She had survived, and whoever trained her hadn't done it here. He didn't speak of it, not immediately. He waited. He watched. The next morning, quiet murmurs drifted across the platoons. Ellison told someone what happened. That someone added a detail. Another exaggerated it. And by noon, a story had formed, not dramatic, just unsettling. Maddox caught him mid-air. No, not caught, stabilized, no impact at all. Like she knew the angle before he fell. Rumors didn't escalate into confidence. They sank into silence. People didn't laugh anymore. They studied. They didn't whisper insults. They whispered what-ifs. And suspicion replaced mockery. During chow, some soldiers avoided sitting near her, not because they disliked her, but because they suddenly questioned what they had assumed to be true. When Avery walked up the barracks stairs, soldiers stepped aside, not deferentially but instinctively, like their bodies understood something their minds couldn't articulate. Avery was aware of the shift. She stayed quiet, accepted being overlooked, volunteered for nothing, blended into corners, but she changed just slightly. Her silence got deeper, not fearful protective. The kind of silence someone uses when they're hiding for a purpose, not out of meekness. McKinley didn't confront her. Instead, he went into personnel systems and pulled up her record. His access wasn't unlimited, but it was enough. Her file wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. Half her early service timeline was redacted. Training schools listed without instructors. Completion reports without performance scores. Deployment credits listed, but no location codes tied to them. Transfer paperwork signed by officials outside standard divisions. A rank reduction documented, but under sealed justification. He stared at the screen longer than he should have. He didn't print it. Didn't download anything. He closed the file after one final look, knowing that whatever was erased wasn't erased by accident. It was erased because someone higher than him didn't want her past connected to her present. Avery didn't know he looked. She wouldn't know, and McKinley decided he would not expose her, not yet, not publicly. Instead, he did something strange. He waited. He watched every drill, every run, every break in routine. He saw her intentionally allow failure, not dramatic failure, but precisely measured incompetence, just enough to never stand out. When squad split, she stayed on the weaker side. When instructors asked for leadership decisions, she stepped backward just an inch. She wasn't bad, she was pretending. And McKinley knew why people pretend, not because they lack ability, but because someone told them not to be seen. The others didn't realize that the fear they felt wasn't about her skill. It was about what her skill implied. No one hides excellence unless it was once required in a place where visibility meant danger. The platoon didn't know that truth. They only sensed it. Later that evening, while formation stood under the orange glow of floodlights, someone whispered the rumor that finally stuck. She wasn't always a private. And that one sentence reshaped everything, not through volume, not through certainty. Through possibility. The possibility that the quiet one, the overlooked one, the struggling one, wasn't weak at all. She was simply no longer willing to be who she used to be. McKinley stayed silent. He didn't correct anyone. He didn't reveal what he knew. Because revealing someone like Avery would not protect her, it would expose her. And he knew better than anyone, some soldiers disappear into the system not because they failed, but because success came with a cost that no uniform could ever fix. General Marcus Halverson stood in front of the assembled companies, arms folded behind his back, the polished hallway amplifying every breath. The evaluation summary was meant to be routine performance averages, leadership notes, training projections. But it never was routine when Halverson spoke. His voice didn't just echo, it cut. "Before we begin," he said, "we need to address a recurring weakness in this battalion." A murmur ran quietly through the formation. People already knew where this was headed. Halverson pointed to a chart displayed on the projector. Performance curves, time logs, red marks clustered in one column. "This," he said, "is what happens when standards bend to accommodate failure." Then he spoke her name. Private Avery Maddox, step forward. Boots shifted, shoulders tensed, not because she was dangerous, but because everyone assumed she was about to be embarrassed again. Avery walked forward, calm as always, hands still, eyelids lowered but posture correct. She stopped exactly where regulation required. Halverson continued, "This soldier represents everything we must correct. Hesitation under pressure, inability to lead, dragging team performance downward." "Sir," a voice interrupted. Everyone froze. Captain Joel McKinley stepped out of formation, posture crisp, eyes locked on Halverson without a trace of challenge, only certainty. "With respect," McKinley said, "before these statements are finalized, I need clarification on one matter." Halverson frowned. "State your concern, Captain." McKinley turned to Avery, not loudly, not dramatically. "Private Maddox, were you ever credentialed under the Raven Sea Combatives Program?" A single sentence. That was all it took. Avery didn't move, didn't blink fast, didn't react with surprise. Her answer came the same way everything else came from, her quiet, plain, honest, "Yes, sir." The air in the hallway changed temperature. Halverson's expression faltered barely, but visibly. The major holding the evaluation clipboard stopped taking notes. The battalion commander lowered his chin, eyes narrowing. A few soldiers whispered, "No way." She said yes. "Raven Sea? That's real?" Everyone knew the name. Not because it was openly taught, but because it was whispered like myth. Raven Sea wasn't regular combatives. It was a clandestine program, tied to off-record deployments and rapid response elements never listed on unit rosters. The known facts were few. Only 27 people ever qualified. Each served in operations that didn't officially exist. None of them were assigned to normal training units afterward. And Avery Maddox, quiet, slow, overlooked, Avery had just confirmed she was one of them. McKinley didn't add anything. He didn't defend her. He didn't explain the significance. He simply stepped back into formation, letting her answer stand alone. Silence collapsed over the room. Halverson's jaw tightened. His face lost color, not dramatically, but in the way a man loses control of the moment he believed he commanded. He opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. Finally, he swallowed and cleared his throat. "Very well," he said faintly. "Proceed." But the damage was already done. 300 soldiers no longer saw Avery as weak. They saw her for what she truly was, someone who didn't need a reputation to have earned one, someone whose silence hadn't been insecurity, but restraint. The mess hall looked identical to the day everything began. Same metal tables, same overhead lights humming with static flicker, same burnt coffee smell drifting from the dispenser that never shut off. 300 soldiers filled the space again. Meal trays, folded napkins, the dull rhythm of utensils tapping plates. Avery Maddox sat in the same spot. At the end of the fourth long row, alone again. She lifted her cup, not carelessly, but lightly, and the bottom edge caught a ridge on the tray. It tipped. Juice spilled across the metal surface, rolling unevenly toward the floor. The sound was subtle, but everyone heard it. It happened again. The memory of the first spill, of what followed, rushed back like a cold gust across the room. General Halverson stood near the entrance, still burning from the revelation that had stripped his authority bare. He walked toward her without hesitation. His boots struck so sharply that soldiers moved out of his path before he reached them. If he could not undo her past, he would reassert control here, in front of everyone. He stopped at her table. "You will stand," he ordered. Avery rose without conflict, as if nothing inside her changed. Her posture neutral, breathing steady, no aggression, no fear. He reached for her wrist-strong grip, intentional pressure, the act less about restraint and more about reclaiming dominance. His hand tightened, ready to yank, ready to shove her toward humiliation again. 5 seconds began. 1. Avery's feet repositioned, not wide, not dramatic, just angled. Her stance shifted from passive formation stance to vector balance, her weight anchored through the ball of her right foot. 2. Her free hand rose, not striking but redirecting. She inverted his wrist with minimal effort, applying torque that folded his elbow inward. His body weight leaned forward unintentionally. 3. Her hip rotated, not forcefully but efficiently. She didn't pull him. She allowed his own forward lean to accelerate. A simple leverage exchange, honed through repetition no one here had witnessed. 4. His shoulder collapsed, his balance broke, and the room saw a general fall faster than anyone could process. He hit the tile floor hard, uniform folding, breath bursting from him in a painful choke. 5. He tapped, not in anger, not in pride, in panic. His palm smacked the floor twice, then again. His face flushed, jaw clenched, air cut off beneath the pressure she controlled with precision. Not enough to injure, just enough to end resistance. Captain McKinley stepped forward, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to reclaim chain of command clarity. "Release him, Maddox." Avery disengaged instantly. She stepped back, posture neutral, arms at her sides, exact regulation stance. She didn't gloat, didn't glance, didn't wait for validation. Halverson tried to speak, but only a weak rasp came out first. He rolled to his elbow, breath trembling, unable to stand without assistance. A pair of soldiers moved forward, but then stopped, realizing they didn't know whether touching him would make the moment worse. Silence spread across the hall. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered insults. Nobody exchanged smirks. Every soldier at every table felt the same truth settle over them. This wasn't dominance. This was restraint. Avery could have shattered bone, dislocated a shoulder, crushed a larynx, but she didn't. Her control under pressure revealed experience, but her restraint revealed character. Private Ellison, the same one she saved near the scaffolding, slowly came to attention. His right hand rose to brow level. He saluted her. Not because of rank, not because of protocol, but because of fact. Another soldier followed. Then another. No command issued it. No officer endorsed it. It was respect that emerged on its own. Halverson remained on the floor, unable to rise, watching the gesture that was no longer his to claim. The room had changed. One moment of pure, undeniable truth had rearranged the balance of power, not through victory, but through humility. Avery returned to her seat as if nothing happened. She didn't look at any of them. Respect was not what she wanted. It was simply what she no longer needed to hide. Avery did not stay long after the incident. She ate the remainder of her meal in silence, cleared her tray, and walked outside while the mess hall was still frozen in disbelief. She did not linger in the hallways or wait to see who would approach her. She did not acknowledge the salutes that quietly rose from those still stunned by what they had witnessed. She simply returned to her barracks locker, retrieved a sealed envelope that had been waiting for authorization, and signed the necessary line. Voluntary reassignment. No protests were raised. Nobody tried to keep her. A quiet escort arrived the next morning, a nondescript government vehicle parked outside the administration offices, no unit markings, no patches, no emblems. She stepped inside without ceremony. No bags, no speeches, no final formation to honor her departure. She moved back toward a world unseen where credentials weren't spoken, names weren't shared, and missions didn't form on public rosters. If her skill was still useful to the country, she would serve silently. If not, she would still disappear with grace. Fort Redwood changed without announcing that it had changed. Command issued updates to policy. Disciplinary methods would no longer rely on public humiliation. Personnel evaluations would include screening for concealed advanced credentials. Peer review structures shifted from punishment first to capability recognition. No one linked these reforms directly to Avery. No official memo carried her name, yet everyone knew why they existed. Inside classrooms, new soldiers were told a version of the story that always began the same way. Once there was a private, everyone ignored. Instructors recited events with measured respect, how she moved, how she didn't react, how she never asked to be seen. None embellished the takedown scene because no embellishment was needed. The facts alone held weight. She didn't attack. She didn't retaliate. She neutralized and then released. Those who witnessed it firsthand told the story softer each time, not as legend, but as caution. How the weakest soldier dropped the general without anger, and underneath that retelling lived a truth many had never confronted. Strength that needs to prove itself is not strength at all. Real strength is not loud. It is not cruel. It is not desperate to be recognized. It waits. It watches. It carries itself like something earned, not borrowed, and when asked to stand without threat, without pride, it simply stands. Avery disappeared back into the places where no ranks are worn and no commendations are displayed. But the silence she left behind never faded. If you saw someone today who looked quiet, overlooked, unsure, what would you assume? Would you see weakness? Or would you pause long enough to realize there might be more behind their silence than anyone knows? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep courage alive across generations, reminding us that strength isn't always loud and heroes rarely announce themselves. Salute to all who served and those still carrying scars we never see.